A man in Volo, Illinois, types a VIN into an email and hits send. Somewhere on the other end, someone he's never met opens it, checks it against a number he's kept private for years, and picks up the phone. That phone call is the entire story. Not a dusty tarp pulled back in a forgotten garage. Not a stranger who had no idea what he was sitting on. Cross-reference, a confirmation, a record matching another record. That's not the story you've heard about these cars. You've heard the other version, the one where a TV legend sits rotting for decades until some lucky nobody stumbles onto it in a barn, restores it for pocket change, and gets rich. That version makes for a better thumbnail. It is, in nearly every documented case, not what happened. 5 vehicles, 5 supposed miracle discoveries. What actually saved them wasn't luck. It was work nobody filmed. If you want the rest of this catalog as it gets built out, every confirmed find, every myth we correct, subscribing is the easiest way to catch it before it's buried in your feed. The barn find myth persists because it flatters the audience. It suggests that history is just lying around, waiting for the right person to walk past it. Anyone could be that person. You could be that person. The documented record tells a different story, and it's less comfortable. These cars survived because specific people spent years, sometimes decades, refusing to let them disappear. Fan historians who built entire archives around a single vehicle, museums that ran forensic authentication on a hunch, restorers who spent 15 years on one car because nobody else would. The myth erases that labor. The record doesn't. Hey, real quick before we keep going. There's a car burned into your head right now from some movie you saw 20 years ago. I built something for that. It's called the Hollywood Car Vault. 25 of the most legendary cars and trucks in movie and TV history. Real illustrated art for everyone, and the real story behind it. Not the version everyone half remembers, the actual history. What Hollywood faked, what happened to the real ones, and what they're worth today. Tap through it right on your phone. No app, no download. And it keeps growing. New rides get added later, free for everyone already in. $17 one time, links in the description if you want in. All right, back to it. Warner Brothers burned through an extraordinary number of 1969 Dodge Chargers during the 7-season run of the Dukes of Hazzard. Reports place the number in the hundreds, with only a couple dozen believed to survive the production. That much is well corroborated. What happened to the actual car from the show's most famous jump is where the story gets specific. Lee 1, the Charger seen flying through the air in the opening credits, wrecked during the filming of the very first episode's jump on November 11, 1978, didn't vanish into obscurity by accident. It was left behind in Georgia when production moved to California, its condition too rough to justify hauling it west. For over 2 decades, its whereabouts were effectively unknown to the wider collector community. What ended that wasn't a passerby, it was Travis Bell, a Dukes of Hazzard obsessive who grew up watching the show with his father and who eventually founded the North American General Lee fan club. Bell didn't stumble onto Lee 1. He went looking for it, tracking leads through Covington, Georgia, where the original episodes were filmed, interviewing crew members, eventually finding Don Schisler, the show's vehicle coordinator, who could speak to where the wrecked cars had gone. That research led him to the car, sitting in rural Georgia woods. Reports place the price he paid at under $1,000, a figure that's been repeated across multiple outlets, though the exact number carries a corroborated tier rather than a documented receipt. Roughly a decade later, Lee 1 crossed the auction block at Barrett-Jackson in Scottsdale. That sale is confirmed, auction house record, public, and searchable. What isn't part of the record is the version where a stranger found it by accident. Bell knew exactly what he was looking for, and he spent years finding it. Separately, and this is worth stating plainly because it's often conflated with Lee 1's story, a 2020 Instagram post revealed a junkyard in Georgia packed with additional General Lee Chargers, connected to stuntman Raymond Cohn and a group called the Northeast Ohio Dukes. Whether any of those cars are authentic production originals, as opposed to later tribute or stunt jump builds, remains genuinely unresolved. That one stays stated unknown. Not every General Lee story has an ending yet. Out of roughly 20 screen-used Trans Ams built for Knight Rider's 4-season run, only 5 are known to still exist today. the rest destroyed under an agreement between the studio and General Motors once filming wrapped. That's confirmed, drawn directly from the people who spent the most time verifying it. Those people are Joe Huth and A.J. Palmgren, who together run something called Knight Rider Historians. They didn't find one kit, they found and now owned 2 of the 5 surviving originals, including the pilot episode cars seen in the show's opening credits. The story of that particular car isn't a barn find either. After filming, it was sold to a promotions company, then reportedly acquired by a Saudi prince in the early 1990s. The car was never claimed. It sat abandoned in a San Diego auction lot for 7 years while title issues went unresolved. Eventually, it was sold, restored, and passed through additional hands before Huth and Palmgren tracked it down and acquired it in 2007. A second stunt car, once displayed at Universal Studios, was discarded into a junkyard after that display closed in 2008, and Huth and Palmgren rescued that one too. What makes this different from the myth isn't just the mechanism, it's the scale. Huth and Palmgren didn't recover a car and walk away with a story to tell at parties. They built a YouTube channel, interviewed surviving cast and crew, and became the closest thing Knight Rider has to an institutional archive because nobody else was going to do it, and they decided that mattered. Here's the detail that matters most in this entire script. The Ferrari Daytona Spider that Don Johnson drove as Sonny Crockett was never actually a Ferrari. Ferrari North America refused to supply real cars to the production. What audiences watched for 2 seasons was a fiberglass body molded off an authentic Daytona and built by customizer Tom McBurney, mounted on a Corvette chassis. 2 of these replicas were built and sold to the production by gray market exotic car importer Al Mardikian, reportedly for $49,000 each. That figure and the build story are corroborated across multiple sources, including the Volo Auto Museum's own account. After Ferrari eventually sued over the replica's prominence, and the car was written out of the show via an on-screen explosion as part of the resulting settlement, Car 1 disappeared from public view. It resurfaced eventually, deteriorating outside in the Texas sun. The Volo Auto Museum purchased it, but before they could confirm what they had, they needed proof. The man who owned the other surviving Miami Vice Daytona replica held documentation with the original VIN numbers for both cars, numbers he kept confidential specifically to prevent fraud. Museum staff emailed him the VIN off the frame of the car they'd acquired and waited. After several days, he called back. It matched. That's the whole mechanism, not a lucky find, a cold email, a private VIN registry, and a phone call that either confirms or ends the search. This is confirmed. It's the museum's own documented account of how authentication happened, and it's about as far from wandered into a storage unit and got lucky as a recovery story gets. This one requires a correction before it can be told correctly, because the popular version gets a basic fact wrong. There was never a second lost original Munster Koach. Only one was built for the television series, constructed from 3 Ford Model T bodies in 21 days at the request of CBS producers who gave customizer George Barris almost no runway to deliver. That's confirmed, straight from Barris's own company records and corroborated by museum documentation. What happened to it isn't a mystery either. Barris auctioned the original coach in 1982, it changed hands, and it now resides permanently at the Volo Auto Museum in Illinois, the same museum, coincidentally, that holds the Miami Vice Daytona. The second coach that shows up in some retellings is a separate, authorized replica, one Barris commissioned in 1984, built by Dick Dean, specifically for a Hollywood Christmas parade appearance. It's real. It's just not a lost twin rediscovered decades later. It was built on purpose for a public event, with paperwork the whole way through. There's a version of this story that's more dramatic. Abandoned under a tarp for over 20 years, a memorabilia dealer's lucky tip, a 6-figure restoration to bring it back from ruin. None of that happened to this car. What actually happened is duller and honestly more reassuring. The original never really left. It went from a customizer's shop to an auction to a museum, with a continuous chain of ownership the whole way. Sometimes the myth isn't wrong about the ending, it's wrong about there having been a mystery at all. Of everything in this script, the Magnum P.I. Ferrari 308 GTS makes the strongest case against the barn find narrative because its paper trail is nearly unbroken. Ferrari supplied roughly 15 308 models across the show's 8-season run, a number that's corroborated through auction documentation and Ferrari historian records. After filming wrapped on each car's rotation, the standard practice, according to multiple documented sales, was for the vehicle to be returned to Ferrari North America in New Jersey, not sold quietly into the used market with no disclosure. Returned, logged, kept inside a system built to track exactly this kind of asset. That's the opposite of the countdown video version of this story, where a fanatic spends years cross-referencing chassis numbers to track down cars that vanished into unsuspecting hands. The real version is almost bureaucratic by comparison. When a pilot episode 308 GTS, the one Tom Selleck drove in Don't Eat the Snow in Hawaii, modified with seat adjustments to fit his 6'4" frame, came up for auction at Barrett-Jackson, it came with documentation. Letters from a Ferrari historian, registry confirmation, a provenance trail that didn't need reconstructing because it was never allowed to break in the first place. There's a quieter irony buried in here too. The exact car most associated with this story is also believed to be the one author and satirist P.J. O'Rourke used for a cross-country road trip documented in Car and Driver back in 1980, a detail that's reported but unverified, resting on tradition and a plausible chain of ownership, rather than a signed confirmation. Even in the best documented story of the five, there's still a piece nobody's nailed down completely. That's not a flaw in the research. That's what honest research looks like. If you're chasing a screen-used vehicle from any era of television, the barn find romance is the thing most likely to cost you money. A seller who leans hard on, found forgotten in a garage, nobody knew what it was, is selling a story, and stories are cheaper to fabricate than paperwork. What the 5 vehicles in this script actually demonstrate is what real provenance looks like. Chassis numbers cross-referenced against production or factory records. Confidential VIN registries held by owners specifically to prevent fraud. Return to manufacturer documentation in the case of vehicles like the Magnum P.I. Ferraris that never let the chain of custody break. Auction house research departments that verify before they list, not after a buyer complains. None of that shows up in a dramatic thumbnail. All of it is the difference between owning a piece of television history and owning an expensive story someone told you once. If you're serious about this category, whether you're buying or just trying to know what you're looking at when a rare find crosses your feed, the documentation is the collectible. The car is just where it's attached. We like the version where history rewards the person who happens to be standing in the right garage. It's a nicer story than the truth, which is that almost nothing survives by accident. Not a car, not a record, not a memory anyone still cares about 40 years later. What actually survives is what someone decided was worth the years it took to keep. Somewhere in Illinois, a VIN is still sitting in a private file, kept confidential by someone who understood exactly what it was protecting. That's not a lucky find. That's a decision made over and over for a very long time by people who never expected anyone to make a video about it.